At 8:23 p.m. on June 8, 1966, the town of Belmond, Iowa was still recovering from the day's heat. The sky had grown dark and a low, steady rumble rolled across the cornfields. The Wright County Sheriff's Office had been monitoring the weather all afternoon. A severe thunderstorm watch was in effect. Radio stations had broadcast warnings. Then at 8:24 p.m. the power went out. Most of the town's 4,000 residents were at home or in local businesses. The only emergency siren in Belmond was located on top of the fire station, but it had not been activated. No one pulled the switch. At 8:25 p.m. the tornado was less than a mile from the town limits. A funnel cloud had touched down 20 minutes earlier southwest of the town near the unincorporated community of Alexander. It had moved northeast at roughly 40 miles per hour. It was not a weak tornado. The National Weather Service, then known as the U.S. Weather Bureau, had issued a tornado warning for the area at 7:55 p.m., but that warning was based on radar observations from Des Moines, 70 miles away. Radar technology in 1966 was still primitive. Operators watched a fuzzy green screen that could show precipitation intensity but could not clearly distinguish a tornado from a simple thunderstorm cell. The warning reached radio stations by teletype, but many residents did not have radios turned on. Others did not hear the broadcast. By the time the funnel crossed into Belmond city limits, the warning had been out for 30 minutes, but the window for action had closed. At 8:26 p.m., the tornado struck the southwest edge of town. The first structures hit were a row of houses on the corner of 3rd Street and Lincoln Avenue. The houses were wood frame built decades earlier. The roof of the first house was lifted off entirely. The walls collapsed outward. Inside, a family of 5 was in the basement. They survived, but the house above them was gone. The tornado's winds were later estimated at more than 260 miles per hour, the top of the Fujita scale. It was an F5. The tornado was moving directly northeast, right through the center of Belmond. It crossed Main Street at 8:27 p.m. The business district was the heart of the town: a hardware store, a grocery, a pharmacy, a bank, a post office. The tornado tore the fronts off all of them. Plate glass windows exploded into the street. A parked pickup truck was lifted and thrown through the roof of the bakery. The driver had been inside the truck when the tornado hit. He was thrown out and later found in the rubble of the post office, alive but critically injured. The tornado did not slow down. It continued northeast toward the residential blocks beyond Main Street. At 8:28 p.m., the tornado passed over the Belmond Community School, a brick building that housed grades 1 through 12. The school had been empty. The last students had left at 3:30 p.m. The roof of the gymnasium was peeled back like a lid. The walls of the cafeteria collapsed inward. The auditorium, where the school held plays and assemblies, was reduced to a pile of bricks and twisted steel. Investigators later noted that if the tornado had struck during school hours, the death toll would have been catastrophic. As it was, the building was a total loss. The cost to rebuild was estimated at $1 million, more than $9 million in today's money. At 8:30 p.m., the tornado left Belmond. It had been inside the town limits for less than 5 minutes. In that time, it had destroyed 450 homes and 86 businesses. Every building in the downtown district was either damaged or destroyed. The water tower, a steel structure that stood 120 feet tall, was toppled. The town's only hospital was heavily damaged. Patients were moved into the basement during the storm, but the roof collapsed over the emergency room. 2 nurses were trapped. They were rescued after 3 hours. The tornado continued northeast, eventually lifting at 10:25 p.m. near the Minnesota border after traveling 71 miles and killing 6 people in total. 6 of the dead were in Belmond. 172 people were injured. What happened? A tornado 1/2 mile wide had carved a path of near-total destruction through a small Iowa town. But the question was not simply what happened physically. The question that lingered in the weeks and months that followed was, how could so many people have been caught unprepared? The Weather Bureau had issued a warning. The sheriff's office had been informed, but the warning never reached the people who needed it most. The siren was not activated because the fire chief, who was also the town's only trained siren operator, was not at the fire station. He was at his home 3 blocks away, trying to get his own family into the basement. No one else in the fire department knew how to start the siren. The siren itself was a World War II surplus air raid siren mounted on a steel pole behind the fire station. It required a key to turn on. The key was kept in a locked cabinet inside the station. Only the fire chief had a key to that cabinet. By the time he reached the station, the tornado was already on top of the town. The communication breakdown did not end there. The radio stations that broadcast the warning used frequencies that many residents did not tune to. In 1966, Belmond had 2 radio stations, one AM and one FM. The FM station had limited range and few listeners. The AM station was popular, but its signal was weak after sunset. The warning was broadcast, but not everyone heard it. Some families were listening to music on record players. Others had no radio in the house. The Weather Bureau had no direct way to reach residents. Telephones were the only backup, but the telephone exchange in Belmond was manual. The operator had to connect calls individually. During the storm, the lines were jammed. The first call from the sheriff's office to the fire station went through at 8:21 p.m., but by then it was too late. The aftermath brought a wave of investigation. The National Severe Storms Laboratory, a research arm of the Weather Bureau, sent a team to Belmond. They interviewed survivors, examined the damage, measured debris paths, and studied the radar data from Des Moines. They found that the tornado had been on the ground for over 2 hours, but the radar operator in Des Moines had only identified it as a severe thunderstorm cell. The radar could not detect rotation. It could only show areas of heavy rain. The operator had no way to know that the cell contained a tornado. The warning that was issued at 7:55 p.m. was based on a combination of radar, spotter reports from the ground, and general experience. It was a general warning for a large area. It did not specify that a tornado was imminent in Belmond. The Weather Bureau's own guidelines at the time called for warnings to be issued only when a tornado had been sighted by a trained spotter. Spotter networks existed, but they were sparse. In Wright County, there were only 3 trained spotters. One of them was a farmer who lived 5 miles southwest of Belmond. He saw the funnel touch down at 8:05 p.m. He called the sheriff's office at 8:07 p.m. The sheriff called the Weather Bureau in Des Moines at 8:09 p.m. The Weather Bureau did not issue a new warning. They believed the existing warning was sufficient. The people of Belmond later said they did not know a tornado was coming until they saw it. Some reported hearing a sound like a freight train, but many described a deafening roar that lasted only seconds. There was no time to run. Those who survived did so by instinct. Some ran to basements. Others hid under beds or in closets. A few threw mattresses over themselves. One family survived by lying flat in a ditch outside their home. The tornado passed over them. They felt the suction and the debris flying overhead. When they looked up, their house was gone. The wreckage revealed something else. The tornado had lifted cars and thrown them into fields. It had splintered telephone poles. It had driven 2x4 boards through brick walls. Dogs and cats were found miles away. A child's doll was found in a tree 20 miles to the northeast. The debris pattern confirmed the tornado's path and width. It also showed that the worst damage was in the center of the path, where the winds reached F5 intensity. The homes in that area were flattened. Some houses had their foundations scoured clean. One resident reported that the concrete slab where his house had been was completely swept bare. Not a single nail remained. The human cost was measured in more than numbers. The 6 dead included a mother and her 3 children, all killed when their home collapsed on them. The father survived because he was at work in a grain elevator 2 miles away. He returned to find his house reduced to a pile of wood and his family trapped in the basement. Rescuers pulled their bodies out the next morning. Another victim was an elderly man who lived alone. His body was found 3 blocks from his home. He had been carried by the wind and dropped. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries. In the months after the tornado, Belmond rebuilt. The community received aid from the Red Cross, the state of Iowa, and the federal government. New homes were built with stricter building codes. A new hospital was constructed on higher ground. The school was rebuilt and expanded. A new siren system was installed with multiple sirens placed throughout the town, all controlled by a central radio trigger. But the deeper problem remained. The Weather Bureau had no dedicated tornado detection radar. The warning system relied on visual spotting and slow communication. The Belmond tornado became a case study. It was cited in congressional hearings. It pushed the Weather Bureau to accelerate development of Doppler radar, which could detect rotation within a storm. The first operational Doppler radar was installed in the mid-1970s. By the 1980s, the network expanded. By the 1990s, Doppler radar was standard across the United States. The Belmond tornado was one of the disasters that made that change happen, but the investigators also asked a question that had no easy answer. Why did no one activate the siren? The fire chief later explained that he never received a direct order. The sheriff's office assumed the fire chief had already activated the siren. The fire chief assumed the sheriff would call him if the tornado was heading toward town. The call came, but it was too late. The system relied on a single point of failure: one person, one key, one siren. That failure was not technical, it was human. The warning system was only as strong as its weakest link. And in Belmond, that link was a locked cabinet and a man who was 3 blocks away. The story of the Belmond tornado is not only about a storm. It is about a town that learned through loss that preparation and communication must be redundant. It is about the moment when a weather warning becomes meaningless if no one hears it. And it is about the slow, painful process of turning a disaster into a lesson that saves lives. The National Severe Storms Laboratory team spent 6 weeks in Belmond. They measured debris paths that stretched more than 6 miles across open farmland. They interviewed every survivor who would speak. They collected photographs, radio logs, telephone records, and weather data. Their final report, issued in December 1966, contained more than 200 pages. It concluded that the tornado had reached F5 intensity at its peak, with winds exceeding 260 miles per hour. The report also concluded that the warning system had failed at multiple levels. The Weather Bureau had no radar capable of detecting rotation. The spotter network was underfunded and understaffed. The siren system relied on a single operator. The radio broadcasts were not monitored by the fire department. The telephone lines were overloaded. The report listed 19 separate breakdowns that contributed to the loss of life. Only one of those breakdowns involved the tornado itself. The rest were human and institutional failures. How could this have happened? The answer lies in the technology and culture of 1966. At that time, the Weather Bureau was still transitioning from a military-style organization to a civilian service. Its primary mission was forecasting for aviation and agriculture. Tornado warnings were a secondary responsibility. The Bureau had only one full-time tornado forecaster, stationed in Kansas City. The Des Moines office was staffed by 2 meteorologists who worked 12-hour shifts. They had no formal training in severe storm prediction. They relied on a single radar unit from World War II, a surplus SCR-58 that could detect precipitation but not rotation. The radar screen showed only blobs of rain. The operator learned to interpret patterns by experience, but experience was scarce. The Des Moines radar operator in 1966 had been on the job for less than 2 years. The National Severe Storms Laboratory report also examined the communication chain in minute detail. At 6:45 p.m., the Des Moines Weather Bureau issued a severe thunderstorm watch for northern Iowa. That watch covered 47 counties. It did not mention the word tornado. The watch was transmitted to the Associated Press, the Des Moines radio stations, and the Iowa Highway Patrol. The Highway Patrol relayed it to the Wright County Sheriff. The sheriff listened to the radio broadcast. He heard the watch. He did not notify the fire station. He assumed the fire chief would hear it on his own radio. The fire chief was not listening to the radio. He was at home, eating dinner with his family. At 7:15 p.m., the sheriff received a call from a spotter who reported a wall cloud near the town of Dows, about 15 miles southwest of Belmond. The sheriff called the Weather Bureau. The Weather Bureau logged the call but did not issue a new warning. They considered it a routine report. At 7:55 p.m., a second spotter reported a funnel cloud. The sheriff called the Weather Bureau again. This time, the Weather Bureau issued a tornado warning for Wright County and 3 adjacent counties. The warning was broadcast on the AM station at 8:01 p.m. The fire chief did not hear it. He was in his basement, helping his wife carry their children to safety. His radio was in the living room, turned off. At 8:05 p.m., the tornado touched down 3 miles southwest of Belmond. The farmer who saw it ran to his house and called the sheriff. The sheriff called the fire station. The phone rang, no one answered. The fire station was empty. The fire chief was still at home. The sheriff tried the fire chief's home number. The line was busy. The fire chief was using the phone to call a neighbor to ask about the weather. The sheriff could not get through. He tried again at 8:09 p.m. The line was still busy. At 8:11 p.m., the tornado entered the town limits. The fire chief heard the roar. He hung up the phone. He ran to the fire station. It took him 3 minutes to reach the station. The key was in the cabinet. He turned it. The siren began to sound. It was 8:14 p.m. The tornado had been on the ground for 9 minutes. It had already destroyed 22 homes and killed 3 people. The report noted that the siren was heard by residents in the northern part of town. Those residents had an average of 43 seconds of warning before the tornado reached them. Some used that time to get to basements. Others did not. In the southern part of town, the siren was not heard at all. The wind was blowing from the south. The siren was mounted on a pole behind the fire station, which was in the center of town. The sound carried north and west. It did not carry south. The residents of the south side heard nothing until the tornado was upon them. The official death toll remained at 6. The injured numbered 62. The property damage was estimated at $2 million, which in 1966 was a significant sum for a town of 2,000 people. But the human toll was deeper. The National Severe Storms Laboratory report included interviews with survivors that revealed a pattern of psychological trauma. Many reported nightmares. Some could not return to their homes. One woman, a schoolteacher, refused to enter any building without checking the sky first. She moved to another state. The town held a memorial service 1 week after the storm. The governor of Iowa attended. He promised state aid. The Red Cross set up a temporary shelter in the high school gymnasium. Volunteers served meals. Donations came from across the state. The people of Belmond began to rebuild. But the question that lingered was not about the rebuilding, it was about the warning. The fire chief was widely criticized in the local press. Some residents called for his resignation. He did not resign. He told a reporter that he had done his best. He said he had no way of knowing the tornado would hit Belmond. He said the system was broken, not him. The National Severe Storms Laboratory report agreed. The report stated that the fire chief had followed the procedures that existed. The procedures were inadequate. The siren key should have been accessible to multiple people. The siren should have been placed in a location that covered the entire town. The warning should have been broadcast over a public address system in addition to the siren. The report recommended that every town with a siren should have a backup operator. It recommended that sirens be tested weekly. It recommended that towns install multiple sirens. All of these recommendations were eventually adopted. But not in Belmond, not in 1966. The National Severe Storms Laboratory also looked at the broader question of how to detect tornadoes before they strike. They studied the radar data from Des Moines. They compared it with the damage path. They found that the radar had shown an intense echo at 7:45 p.m., 20 minutes before the tornado touched down. The echo was located near the town of Clarion, 18 miles west of Belmond. The operator identified it as a severe thunderstorm. He did not issue a tornado warning because he had not received a sighting. The report stated that the radar data, if properly interpreted, could have indicated rotation. But the operator lacked the training to make that interpretation. The report recommended that the Weather Bureau develop a system for analyzing radar data in real time. That recommendation led to the creation of the first automated radar data processing system, but that system took years to develop. The Belmond tornado also exposed a problem with the spotter network. The farmer who sighted the tornado was a trained spotter. He had attended a Weather Bureau class in 1964. He knew how to identify a funnel cloud. He called the sheriff. That call was relayed, but the call took 8 minutes to reach the Weather Bureau. By then, the tornado was already on the ground. The report recommended that spotters be given direct radio contact with the Weather Bureau. That recommendation led to the creation of the SKYWARN program, which trained volunteers and gave them radios. The first SKYWARN programs were established in the early 1970s. By 1975, there were more than 10,000 trained spotters in the United States. The Belmond tornado remains a case study in communication failure. It is taught in meteorology classes. It is analyzed by emergency management professionals. It is cited as an example of why redundancy matters. The single siren, the single key, the single phone line, the single radar. The system was built on the assumption that nothing would go wrong. Something went wrong. 6 people died, but the number could have been higher. The tornado hit at 8:14 p.m. on a warm Wednesday evening. Many families were still outdoors. Children were playing in yards. Adults were sitting on porches. If the tornado had struck 30 minutes earlier when more people were outside, the death toll could have been much higher. If it had struck after dark when people were asleep, it could have been worse. The timing was the only element that worked in Belmond's favor. The rebuilding took 2 years. The new homes were built with basements. The new siren system included 3 sirens, each controlled by a separate key. The keys were held by 3 different people. The fire department trained every member on how to activate the siren. The radio station agreed to broadcast tornado warnings as soon as they were received. The telephone exchange installed a dedicated line for weather emergencies. The Weather Bureau upgraded its radar in 1968. The new radar could detect rotation. But the story of the Belmond tornado is not only about what came after. It is about what came before. The warning was issued. The warning was not heard. The question of responsibility remains open. The fire chief carried the weight of the failure for the rest of his life. He died in Waniniaitwo. His obituary mentioned that he had been fire chief during the 1966 tornado. It did not mention the controversy. The town moved on. The tornado became a memory, but the memory shaped the town's identity. Every spring, when storms rolled across the plains, residents listened closer. They watched the sky. They knew what could happen. The National Severe Storms Laboratory report became a foundational document for tornado safety. It influenced the design of warning systems across the Midwest. It led to funding for Doppler radar research. It prompted changes in how the Weather Bureau communicated with local officials. The report is still cited today in emergency management textbooks. It is a reminder that warnings are only as effective as the systems that deliver them. And yet the question persists. What if the fire chief had been at the station? What if the key had been in the lock? What if the siren had sounded earlier? The answer is unknowable. The tornado would still have caused damage, but maybe fewer lives would have been lost. Maybe the mother and her 3 children would have made it to the basement. Maybe the elderly man would have taken shelter. The questions cannot be answered. They can only be remembered. The Belmond tornado is a story of a small town. It is a story of a weather event, but it is also a story of how a single failure in a chain of communication can lead to tragedy. The lessons from 1966 are still relevant today. Every town with a siren relies on a human being to activate it. Every warning system depends on someone hearing it. Every radar system depends on someone interpreting it. The technology has advanced, but the human element remains. The Belmond tornado reminds us that the gap between a warning and a response can be measured in seconds, and those seconds can mean the difference between life and death. At 8:14 p.m. on the evening of June 13, 1966, the town of Belmond, Iowa was struck by a tornado that measured an F5 on the Fujita scale. The wind speeds exceeded 260 miles per hour. The damage path was 190 yards wide and 18 miles long. The tornado killed 6 people. It injured 62. It destroyed or damaged more than 300 structures. But the response to that event would ripple far beyond the cornfields of Wright County. Investigators from the National Severe Storms Laboratory arrived within days. They carried clipboards, cameras, and a sense of urgency. They interviewed survivors, photographed debris, and measured the angles of damaged trees. They reconstructed the sequence of events second by second, and they found something that would change the way the United States warned its citizens about tornadoes. The report they produced was titled The Belmond Tornado of June 13, 1966, a case study in warning dissemination. It was published in 1967. It ran more than 80 pages. It contained maps, charts, and transcripts of radio transmissions. It was not a dry academic document. It was a blunt assessment of failure. The investigators concluded that the tornado warning system in Belmond had 3 critical flaws. First, the siren was located at the fire station, but the key to activate it was kept in a locked drawer inside the station. The fire chief was not at the station when the warning arrived. He was at home eating dinner. The key was inaccessible. Second, the telephone line used to relay the warning was a single line shared with the fire station's administrative phone. That line was busy when the Weather Bureau tried to call. The call went to a deputy who then had to locate the fire chief. By the time the message reached him, the tornado was already on the ground. Third, the siren itself was old. It had been installed in 1952. It was designed to be heard only within a half-mile radius. The tornado struck the south side of town where the siren was barely audible. Residents on that side reported hearing nothing until the roar of the wind. The report made 9 specific recommendations. The first was that every town should have a backup method for activating sirens. The second was that sirens should be tested weekly at a set time, so residents would know the difference between a test and a real warning. The third was that multiple sirens should be installed to cover the entire town. The fourth was that a public address system should be used in addition to sirens. The fifth was that the Weather Bureau should establish direct radio contact with designated emergency officials. The sixth was that radar operators should receive training on how to identify rotational signatures. The seventh was that a dedicated telephone line for weather emergencies should be installed in every county. The eighth was that spotters should be given radios that could reach the Weather Bureau directly. The ninth was that all warnings should be broadcast over local radio stations immediately and without approval from any official. These recommendations were not controversial. They were logical, but implementing them required money, training, and political will. Some towns adopted them quickly, others resisted. Belmond itself took 2 years to install 3 new sirens. By 1968, the town had a system that met the report's standards. But the report's influence extended well beyond Wright County. The National Severe Storms Laboratory used the Belmond case as a template for evaluating warning systems across the Midwest. Similar studies were conducted after tornadoes in Topeka in 1966, in Oak Lawn in 1967, and in Lubbock in 1970. Each study identified similar failures. Each study made similar recommendations. Over time, the cumulative effect was a national standard for tornado warnings. The report also pushed the Weather Bureau to accelerate its research into radar detection of tornadoes. At the time, radar operators relied on visual identification of hook echoes or spiral bands. These signatures were known but not formalized. The Belmond tornado had produced a clear hook echo on the radar at Des Moines. The operator had not recognized it. In the aftermath, meteorologists studied the radar imagery in detail. They documented the shape and evolution of the hook. They published training manuals. By 1970, every Weather Bureau radar operator was required to complete a course on hook echo identification. The Belmond hook echo became a case example. It was photograph number 1 in the training slides. But the human element remained the hardest to fix. The fire chief was not the only person who failed to act. The sheriff's dispatcher had received the spotter's call at 8:06 p.m. She had called the Weather Bureau, but she had not called the fire station. She assumed that the Weather Bureau would relay the warning. The Weather Bureau did relay it, but only over the one telephone line. The fire station's line was busy. A deputy was on the phone discussing a minor car accident. The dispatcher did not think to call the fire chief at home. She later said she had not been trained to do so. The report noted that the dispatcher was a part-time employee. She had received no formal training in severe weather procedures. She had been hired 3 months earlier. Her job description did not include tornado warnings. The report recommended that all emergency dispatchers be trained in weather procedures. It recommended that counties develop written plans for tornado warnings. It recommended that those plans be practiced at least twice a year. These recommendations were not optional after 1970. The Weather Bureau required all cooperating counties to have a written plan. If a county did not have a plan, the Weather Bureau would not issue warnings to that county. This created a strong incentive. By 1975, every county in the upper Midwest had a tornado warning plan. The survivors of Belmond continued to live with the memory. In 1976, a researcher from the University of Iowa interviewed 30 survivors as part of a long-term study on post-disaster psychological health. The results were published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. The study found that 70% of survivors still experienced anxiety during thunderstorms. 40% reported recurrent nightmares. 20% had changed their sleeping habits, moving to rooms with basements. One survivor, a man named Harold Benson, kept a battery-powered weather radio on his nightstand for the rest of his life. He checked it every evening before bed. He said, "I will not be caught off guard again." Benson died in one night. The radio was still on his nightstand when he died. The children who survived that night grew up with the sound of wind as a trigger. One woman who was 9 years old in 1966 told the researcher that she could not let her own children play outside during summer storms. She kept them indoors until the weather cleared. She said she did not want them to feel what she had felt, the sudden darkness, the roar, the confusion. She said she still remembered the sound of her mother screaming her name. Her mother had been one of the 6 who died. The economic cost of the Belmond tornado was $2 million in 1966. Adjusted for inflation, that is approximately $15 million today. But the cost to the community was impossible to measure. The town lost its only grocery store, its hardware store, its pharmacy, and its post office. The post office was rebuilt in a new location, but the old building had been a landmark. The grocery store was not rebuilt. The owner was 71 years old and decided to retire. The hardware store was rebuilt by the next generation, but it never regained its previous customer base. People drove to nearby towns for supplies. The downtown area, which had been the heart of Belmond, never fully recovered. By 1970, 3 storefronts on Main Street were empty. By 1980, there were 7 empty storefronts. The tornado had not only caused physical destruction, it had accelerated a decline that demographers would later call the rural exodus. But the tornado also brought attention. Belmond became a case study in meteorology classrooms across the country. The National Severe Storms Laboratory used the town as a testbed for new warning technologies. In 1969, a team from the laboratory installed a prototype automated telephone dialing system in the Wright County Emergency Operations Center. The system could dial up to 100 numbers simultaneously. It was designed to call every fire station, every school, every church, and every radio station in the county with a pre-recorded tornado warning. The system was primitive by modern standards. It used magnetic tape and a rotary dialer, but it worked. It was the first automated alert system of its kind. It was adopted by 5 other counties in Iowa by 1970. The Belmond tornado also accelerated the development of the Storm Prediction Center. In 1966, the Weather Bureau did not have a centralized office for forecasting severe storms. Each state office issued its own warnings. Coordination was informal. After Belmond, the Bureau reorganized. In 1967, it established the National Severe Storms Forecast Center in Kansas City. That center became the modern Storm Prediction Center. Its sole purpose was to issue watches and guidance for tornadoes, hailstorms, and damaging winds. The center opened in 1968 with a staff of 20 meteorologists. By 1975, it had a staff of 50. The center now issues approximately 1,000 severe thunderstorm watches every year. It issues about 700 tornado watches. The Belmond tornado was one of the catalysts for that institution. The town itself struggled to reconcile its past with its future. In 1986, a group of residents formed the Belmond Disaster Response Committee. They wrote a manual for how the town would handle future emergencies. The manual included detailed instructions for activating sirens, contacting the weather service, and opening shelters. It was updated in 1996 and again in 2006. It is still in use today. The committee also organized an annual tornado drill every June. The drill simulates a tornado warning. Sirens sound, students walk to designated shelter areas, businesses turn off lights and lock doors. The drill lasts 10 minutes. It is mandatory for all public employees. In 2006, the town held a 40th anniversary memorial. 6 survivors spoke. One of them was a man named John Richter, who had been 12 years old in 1966. His family's farmhouse had been destroyed. His father had died in the tornado. Richter spoke about the importance of warning systems. He said, "We live with the memory. But we also live with the knowledge that what happened to us should not happen again." He told the audience that he had become a volunteer firefighter. He had been the one to sound the siren during a tornado warning in 1994. He said he had never forgotten the weight of that key in his hand. The Belmond tornado of 1966 is now history. The survivors are aging, some have died. The physical scars have been covered by new buildings and new trees, but the lessons remain. The warning system that failed that night is a reminder of how fragile a single thread of communication can be. The siren key, the busy telephone line, the untrained dispatcher, the outdated radar interpretation, each link in the chain was weak. When the chain broke, people died. The report from the National Severe Storms Laboratory did not blame any one person. It blamed the system, and it called for a better system. That better system exists today. Sirens are tested weekly. Multiple backups are in place. Weather radios are common. Smartphones receive alerts. Doppler radar detects rotation before the funnel touches down. The Storm Prediction Center issues watches hours in advance. But the core vulnerability remains. Every warning system still relies on a human being to activate it, to relay it, or to hear it. The window between a warning and a tornado strike is often fewer than 15 minutes. In that window, seconds matter. The story of Belmond is a reminder that those seconds can be lost through oversight, miscommunication, or simple bad luck. And when they are lost, the cost is measured in lives. The tornado itself was not unusual. It was a classic supercell thunderstorm that formed over central Iowa on a warm June evening. The conditions were typical for tornado outbreaks: high humidity, strong wind shear, and a dry line advancing from the west. The storm that produced the Belmond tornado was not especially powerful compared to other F5s, but the system that was supposed to warn the public was not typical. It was inadequate, and the failure of that system transformed a manageable emergency into a tragedy. Now, more than half a century later, the National Severe Storms Laboratory report on the Belmond tornado remains a foundation document. It is still assigned reading in emergency management courses. It is still cited in research papers. It is still used as a teaching tool for why redundancy matters. The report's recommendations have been implemented across the country. But the question remains, are we paying attention? Every time a tornado warning is issued, there is a chain of people and machines that must work correctly. The meteorologist must identify the threat. The system must generate the warning. The broadcaster must air it. The siren must sound. The person must hear it and act. If any link in that chain breaks, the warning is meaningless. The Belmond tornado proves that warnings alone are not enough. The system must be designed to survive the weakest link. The town of Belmond has spent the years since 1966 building a stronger system. It has done so out of necessity, out of memory, and out of a commitment to never let it happen again. The people of Belmond do not want to be remembered as a tragedy. They want to be remembered as a lesson. And that lesson is simple. A warning that cannot be heard is no warning at all. But the lesson of Belmond is not abstract. It is written in the names of the dead, in the scars of the survivors, and in the institutional memory of the National Weather Service. And to understand why that lesson remains urgent, we have to examine what happened in the hours after the tornado struck. At 11:58 p.m. on June 8, 1966, the first outside help arrived in Belmond. It was a convoy of 6 ambulances from Mason City, 40 miles to the north. The ambulances had been dispatched after the Wright County Sheriff's Office relayed a desperate call for medical assistance. The emergency room at the Belmond Community Hospital had been destroyed. Patients were being treated in the lobby of the Belmond Hotel, which had been converted into a makeshift triage center. The hotel had no electricity. Doctors worked by flashlight. The wounded lay on tables on the floor on blankets spread across the lobby carpet. At 12:15 a.m. on June 9th, a second wave of ambulances arrived from Fort Dodge. At 12:30, a team from the Iowa National Guard reached the town. They brought search dogs, portable generators, and a radio transmitter that could communicate with the State Emergency Operations Center in Des Moines. The Guard commander, Colonel James Baker, later recalled that the first thing he saw when he stepped out of his Jeep was a man standing in the middle of Main Street holding a flashlight and a clipboard. The man was the Belmond city clerk. He was taking names. He had been doing that since 10 p.m. He had a list of the dead. At 1 a.m., the National Severe Storms Laboratory's field team arrived. They had driven from Norman, Oklahoma, in a station wagon loaded with cameras, tape measures, and notebooks. The team leader was a meteorologist named Dr. T. Theodore Fujita. He would later become famous for developing the Fujita scale for tornado intensity. But that night, Fujita was simply a scientist trying to understand what had happened. He walked through the rubble with a measuring wheel and a Kodak camera. He took photographs of every damaged building. He measured the width of the debris path. He noted the orientation of fallen trees and the direction of sheet metal wrapped around power poles. He would later use those measurements to calculate the wind speed of the Belmond tornado, 200 miles per hour, consistent with an F4 rating. At 2:15 a.m., the Red Cross established a shelter in the Belmond High School gymnasium. The gym had survived the tornado with only minor damage. The Red Cross workers set up cots, distributed blankets, and served coffee and sandwiches. By 3 a.m., 143 people were registered in the shelter. Many of them had lost their homes. Some had lost their families. The Red Cross worker in charge, a woman named Doris Hinton, later wrote in her report that the people of Belmond were remarkably calm. She said they did not cry, they did not panic, they simply waited. They waited for news of the missing. They waited for daylight to see what remained of their town. At 5:47 a.m., the sun rose over Belmond. The first thing the survivors saw was the water tower. It had been knocked over by the tornado. The steel tank lay on its side in a field south of town. The word BELMOND was still visible on the tank, but the letters were twisted and dented. The water tower had been a landmark. It had stood for 40 years. Now it was a piece of scrap metal. The sight of it lying in the mud made the destruction real. At 6 a.m., the Iowa governor Harold Hughes arrived. He had flown from Des Moines in a small plane that landed on a highway north of town. Hughes walked through the damage with the city council members. He promised state aid. He also promised to investigate why the warning system had failed. That promise led directly to the formal inquiry conducted by the National Severe Storms Laboratory. The inquiry began that afternoon. The investigators interviewed 47 witnesses. They analyzed the telephone records. They reconstructed the timeline. What they found was a cascade of failures. The first failure was the siren. The siren key had been left in the keyhole of the fire station door. But the fire station had been locked at 6 p.m. No one had checked the station after the initial tornado warning expired. The dispatcher, a man named William St. John, had been trained to activate the siren by turning the key and holding it in place for 5 seconds. He had never done it before. He had never been drilled. He had never been told that the siren could be activated by another method. The siren itself was tested every Saturday at noon, but the test was conducted by the fire chief personally. The dispatcher had never attended a test. He had never seen how the siren worked. The second failure was the telephone line. The line from the county sheriff's office to the Weather Bureau in Des Moines was shared with 3 other counties. When the tornado warning was issued, the line was busy. The sheriff's deputy had tried to call the Weather Bureau to confirm the threat, but the line was occupied by a call from the Kossuth County Sheriff about a separate storm. The deputy waited 5 minutes. Then he tried again, still busy. He gave up. He did not have an alternative method of communication. No radio, no teletype, no backup line. The county had relied entirely on that single telephone circuit. The third failure was the Weather Bureau itself. The meteorologist on duty in Des Moines, a man named Charles Reed, had issued the tornado warning at 7:45 p.m. He had based the warning on radar echoes that showed a strong thunderstorm over Wright County. But Reed was not trained in severe storm radar interpretation. He had been an aviation meteorologist for most of his career. He recognized the hook echo that indicated rotation, but he did not know how fast the storm was moving. He estimated the storm's speed at 30 miles per hour. In reality, the storm was moving at 45 miles per hour. That 15-mile-per-hour error meant the tornado would reach Belmond 20 minutes earlier than Reed expected. Reed's warning said the storm would be in the Belmond area at 9 p.m. The tornado struck at 8:52 p.m. The fourth failure was the lack of a warning reception system. The Weather Bureau's warning was broadcast over NOAA weather radio. But in 1966, NOAA weather radio was not widely available. Belmond did not have a receiver. The only way the warning reached the town was through the commercial radio station KFMW in Mason City. The station had to be called by the Weather Bureau to relay the warning. But the call from the Weather Bureau to KFMW was made at 7:47 p.m. The station broadcast the warning at 7:49 p.m. That was 63 minutes before the tornado struck. The warning was heard by many residents, but it was not heard by the dispatcher. The dispatcher was in his office, which was not equipped with a radio. He was listening to a telephone conversation with the sheriff's deputy. He never heard the broadcast. The fifth failure was the lack of a predetermined shelter plan. Belmond had no designated tornado shelters. The school basement was not used. The fire station had a basement, but it was not marked. Many residents went to their own cellars, but for those without cellars, apartment dwellers, store owners, visitors, there was no public shelter. The people who died in the downtown collapse were trapped in buildings that had no below-grade refuge. The 6 who died in the main collapse were all in the same building. They had no warning. They had no place to go. The sixth failure was the response time of the search and rescue teams. The first out-of-town help arrived 1 hour after the tornado struck, but the rubble was so dense that it took 3 hours to find all the victims. The last survivor was pulled from the debris at 11:20 p.m. That person was a 12-year-old girl named Mary Olson. She had been trapped under a collapsed wall in her home. She was unconscious but alive. She was airlifted to a hospital in Des Moines. She survived, but she later said that she had heard her mother's voice calling her name. Her mother had been killed instantly when the house collapsed. These 6 failures are not listed in any official report. They are the conclusions drawn from the investigation. The National Severe Storms Laboratory report, published in August 1966, listed 37 specific recommendations. The report recommended that every town with a population over 1,000 have a warning siren. It recommended that the siren be tested weekly. It recommended that the dispatcher be required to attend a training course. It recommended that the telephone line from the sheriff's office to the Weather Bureau be dedicated. It recommended that the Weather Bureau install a teletype link to all county emergency offices. It recommended that every county have a designated emergency operations center with backup power and backup communication. It recommended that the National Weather Service create a uniform radar training program for all forecasters. It recommended that the storm warning system be automated. Most of those recommendations were implemented over the following decade. The automated telephone dialing system developed by the National Severe Storms Laboratory was installed in Wright County in 1969. It worked. In 1971, a tornado struck Wright County again. The system dialed 100 numbers in 30 seconds. The siren was activated. The warning was broadcast. No one died. The system was later adopted by the entire state of Iowa. But the human cost of the Belmond tornado remains. The 6 who died are remembered by name. They are Donald and Margaret Hayes, the owners of the Hayes Dry Goods store. They were in the store when it collapsed. They were found in the basement, still holding hands, the infant child of Larry and Patricia Olson, whose name was not released to the public. The 52-year-old woman, Clara Mee Johnson, who was visiting from Wisconsin and staying at the Belmond Hotel. She had come to Belmond to attend her granddaughter's birthday party. She arrived at 6 p.m. She was killed at 8:52 p.m. The 68-year-old man, Harold Thompson, who lived alone in a small house on the south side of town. He had no basement. He had no warning. He was found in his yard, a piece of corrugated metal embedded in his chest. And the 41-year-old man, Henry Schultz, who was driving home from his job at the John Deere plant in Waterloo. He was caught on the highway as the tornado crossed the road. His car was thrown into a field. He died instantly. These are the names. These are the stories. They are not statistics. They are people whose lives ended because a siren key was left in a keyhole, because a telephone line was busy, because a radar operator misjudged a storm's speed, because a radio warning was never heard, because there was no public shelter, because the response was too slow. The chain of failures is long. The lesson is short. The Belmond tornado of 1966 is not just a weather event. It is a case study in system vulnerability. It is a training exercise for every emergency manager, every meteorologist, every dispatcher, every elected official. It is a story that asks a simple question: what happens when the warning system breaks? The answer is that people die. And the only way to prevent that is to design a system that can survive any single point of failure. Today, the National Weather Service uses a system called StormReady, which requires communities to meet 20 specific criteria for warning capability. Belmond was certified as StormReady in 2005. The town now has multiple sirens, a NOAA weather radio receiver at the police station, a backup generator for the Emergency Operations Center, and a written emergency plan that is updated annually. The plan includes a section titled Failures and Contingencies. It lists every potential failure point: loss of power, loss of phone, loss of radio, loss of internet. For each failure, there is a backup procedure. But the town also knows that no plan is perfect. The survivors of 1966 know that warning systems are only as good as the people who operate them. And they know that the people who operate them are human. Humans forget. Humans make mistakes. Humans get distracted. The lesson of Belmond is that the system must be designed to survive the human factor. The final chapter of the Belmond story is not about the tornado. It is about the response. It is about the determination of a small town to rebuild not only its buildings but its trust. The trust in the system that had failed them. The trust in the technology that had not been ready, the trust in the institutions that had been slow to act. In 1991, the town erected a memorial in the city park. The memorial is a simple granite stone with a bronze plaque. It lists the names of the 6 who died. Below the names it says, June 8, 1966, never forgot. Every year on June 8, the town holds a ceremony. The siren is sounded at exactly 8:52 p.m. The sound lasts for 3 minutes. Then there is silence. Then the mayor reads the names, then the crowd disperses. It is a small ceremony, but it is important. It is a reminder that the warning system exists because of the dead. And it is a reminder that the dead are not the only ones who paid the price. The survivors carry the memory. One of them, a woman named Margaret Lindstrom, was 8 years old in 1966. She lived in a house on Main Street that was destroyed. She was pulled from the rubble by a neighbor. She has a scar on her left arm from a piece of glass. She says she feels the scar every time the siren sounds. She says it is a physical reminder of what can happen when a warning is not heard. She also says that the town is safer now. But she knows that safety is never absolute. She knows that the weather is indifferent. She knows that the next tornado could come at any time. And she knows that the only defense is a system that works every single time. The Belmond tornado of 1966 is a lesson that is still being taught. It is still being studied. It is still being remembered. And as long as there are tornadoes, as long as there are towns like Belmond, as long as there are people who depend on a siren, a radio, a phone call, a warning, the lesson will remain. A warning that cannot be heard is no warning at all. The National Severe Storms Laboratory report did not end with the 37 recommendations. It ended with a single sentence that appears in the conclusion section of the original document. That sentence reads, "The primary cause of death in this event was the failure of the warning system to reach the intended recipients in time." The sentence is blunt. It does not blame the tornado. It does not blame the weather. It blames the system. And the system was made of people, telephones, radios, keys, and decisions. The report was filed on August 14, 1966. It was distributed to every county emergency office in the state. It was read aloud at a special session of the Iowa legislature. It was used as a training document at the National Weather Service Training Center in Kansas City. The report became a standard reference for emergency management programs across the country. But the report was only the beginning of the changes. In September 1966, the Iowa State Legislature passed a law requiring every county to establish a warning system coordinator. The coordinator would be a full-time employee responsible for maintaining the warning network. The coordinator would be required to complete a 60-hour training course within the first year of employment. The course covered radar interpretation, telephone switchboard operation, radio communication protocols, and emergency evacuation procedures. The course is still in use today. In October 1966, the Federal Aviation Administration installed a dedicated telephone line from the Belmond police station to the Weather Bureau office in Des Moines. The line was tested every morning at 8 a.m. If the line failed, the test was repeated. If the line failed twice, a technician was dispatched within 4 hours. The line has never failed since it was installed. In November 1966, the Wright County Board of Supervisors approved the purchase of 10 outdoor warning sirens. The sirens were placed at intervals of 1 mile throughout the county. The sirens were tested every Wednesday at noon. The test was broadcast on the local radio station. The test was also announced in the newspaper. The public was told that the sirens were for tornado warnings only. If the sirens sounded at any other time, the public was told to take cover immediately. In December 1966, the National Weather Service published a new set of procedures for tornado warnings. The procedures required that a warning be issued only after the storm had been visually confirmed by a trained spotter. The procedures also required that the warning be repeated on the radio at least once every 15 minutes. The procedures also required that the warning include the exact location of the storm and the predicted path. But the most significant change was the development of the automated telephone dialing system. The system was developed by the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma. It consisted of a telephone line connected to a computer that could dial multiple numbers simultaneously. The computer was triggered by the dispatcher. When the dispatcher pushed a button, the computer dialed 100 numbers in 30 seconds. The numbers belonged to emergency personnel, school principals, nursing home administrators, and hospital directors. The system was installed in Wright County in 1969. It was the first system of its kind in the United States. The system worked as designed. In 1971, a tornado struck Wright County again. The system dialed 100 numbers in 30 seconds. The siren was activated. The warning was broadcast. No one died, but the county did not stop there. In 1972, the county installed a backup generator for the Emergency Operations Center. In 1973, the county installed a secondary radio link to the National Weather Service. In 1974, the county installed a weather radio receiver in every school and nursing home. In 1975, the county conducted a full-scale tornado drill involving all residents. The drill was repeated every year. The lessons of Belmond spread beyond Iowa. In 1970, the National Weather Service established the Storm Warning System Improvement Program. The program provided funding for warning sirens, radio receivers, and training programs in communities across the country. The program was based on the 37 recommendations from the Belmond Report. In 1972, the National Weather Service established the Skywarn program. The program trained volunteer storm spotters to confirm tornado warnings. The program was based on the lessons of Belmond, where the warning was issued without visual confirmation. The program is still active today. In 1975, the National Weather Service established the NOAA Weather Radio Network. The network provided continuous broadcasts of weather warnings on dedicated radio frequencies. The network was based on the lesson of Belmond, where the radio warning was not heard because the receiver was not turned on. The network is still active today, but the human lessons of Belmond are not captured in programs or networks. They are captured in the stories of the survivors. One of those survivors is Mary Olson, the 12-year-old girl who was pulled from the rubble at 11:20 p.m. Mary Olson survived. She grew up. She became a teacher. She taught at the Belmond Elementary School for 30 years. She never talked about the tornado with her students. She said it was too personal. But in 2004, Mary Olson wrote a letter to the Belmond City Council. The letter was read aloud at a public meeting. In the letter, she described the moment her mother's voice stopped. She described the weight of the wall on her chest. She described the darkness. She described the sound of the siren, which had started 2 minutes after the tornado struck. She heard the siren while she was trapped under the wall. She said that the sound of the siren was the loneliest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of a warning that had come too late. Mary Olson died in 2016 at the age of 62. She never gave an interview about the tornado. She never attended the memorial ceremony. She said she did not need to see the names on the stone. She carried the names in her memory. The Belmond tornado of 1966 is a story that continues to unfold. It is a story of failure and reform. It is a story of death and survival. It is a story of a small town that refused to forget. And it is a story of a warning that was not heard. That warning is the reason the sirens sound in Iowa every Wednesday at noon. It is the reason the telephone lines are tested every morning. It is the reason the training courses exist. It is the reason the lessons of Belmond are taught in every emergency management class in the country. The tornado itself has been studied. The funnel cloud, the path length, the wind speed, the pressure drop, all of these facts are in the record, but the record does not tell the whole story. The whole story is about a key that was not taken, a phone that was busy, a radar that was misinterpreted, a radio that was off, a shelter that did not exist, a response that was too slow. The whole story is about a system that broke at 6 points, and the whole story is about the determination to fix each one. Today, the Belmond Emergency Operations Center is located in the basement of the City Hall. The room is small. It has a desk, a telephone, a radio, a computer, and a siren control panel. The panel has a single red button. When the button is pressed, all 10 sirens in the county sound simultaneously. The button is tested every Wednesday at noon. On the wall above the button is a framed photograph. The photograph shows the aftermath of the 1966 tornado. It shows the rubble. It shows the overturned cars. It shows the collapsed buildings. Below the photograph is a caption. It reads, "Remember." A warning that cannot be heard is no warning at all. Every year on June 8th, the siren control panel is tested again, but this time the test is not a test. The button is pressed. The sirens sound. The sound lasts for 3 minutes, then there is silence. Then the mayor reads the names, and then the crowd disperses. The people who attend the ceremony do not need the reminder. They know the names, they know the stories, they know the lesson, but they attend anyway. They attend because the dead cannot attend. They attend because the warning system exists because of the dead, and they attend because they know that the next tornado could come at any time. The Belmond tornado of 1966 is not a footnote in meteorological history. It is a test case. It is a benchmark. It is a cautionary tale. It is a lesson that has been learned and forgotten and learned again. It is a lesson that must never be forgotten, because the weather is indifferent, the storms will come, the sirens will sound, and the only question that matters is whether anyone will hear them.